So, this is my partner, Jason Storey. We are collaborators and partners in a band out of Cape Town, South Africa called Unknown Union. I know, it's a big deal. Mashallah. And before I get into anything, I'll let my brother, the founder of the band, tell you what it's all about.
Yeah, thank you everybody so much for coming out. Thank you so much. First of all, you know, it's amazing to be here. I'd like to thank the founders of Soul DXB. This is my first time to Dubai. This is my first time coming here and experiencing this kind of creative energy and culture in one place. Yo, we are all one people, and thank you so much for coming in and seeing what we're about. Unknown Union is, and before I say that, I'd also like to say thank you to my brothers right here on the stage. Without these two gentlemen, my sister right there, the co-founder of Unknown Union, none of this would be possible. Dr. Barbaro, he's going to kick off, and you're going to say a few things about the history, the art, and the culture that really backs a lot of the brand's mission and ethos and research. But I'm going to say just two minutes worth real quick. People have asked me recently, in fact, where's my brother Carlos? Okay, Carlos asked me recently, he was like, what is Unknown Union? This was on the phone. And I was like, okay, I started explaining it. And then he was like, okay, listen patiently. And he was like, okay, so what is Unknown Union? And then he kept repeating it and said, like, undertake that exercise. Repeat it until you distill it as far as you can. I've attempted to do that. I'm still not there yet. But I would say Unknown Union is us. It's our shared collective story as human beings on this planet. That is essentially what this brand is. We are not a fashion brand first. We're a storytelling operation. We are a group, a community of people who are celebrating one another's identities. Clothing is just one of the mediums through which we communicate. So thank you so much for coming to hear our story. I'd like to hand it over for a few minutes to Dr. Barbaro so we can like dig in and understand really what does that mean.
Hello, thank you everyone. Hello. Thank you everyone. It's a little bit terrifying to be here in front of many years being in front of students, and here is completely different kind of environment. But I would like to first to say thank you to DXB family, specific to Raj, Hussein, Nick, Quentin, Lucy, Yasiin, Jason, Oscar, Jennifer, Bernard, Umi, Armish, and Carlos for make this thing happen. And also I would like to dedicate what we will talk today to all of the people I mentioned here and all of you. You wanted me to start I don't like to sit down. I think I get a little bit nervous. And also I'm nervous.
He's lying. He's a mad genius.
Yeah. What I tried to do today is kind of answer the question from Carlos, what is Unknown Union, to providing a kind of foundation to why we are here and why we do things, and how and why. And the first, it doesn't change. The first, I just wanted to show a little bit the outlines and the continent of Africa. Maybe you know, from many places, people they don't know where is Africa and how big it is in compared to the rest of the world. And it's on the left is a map of from Google Earth, and this is an actual political map of the continent. Next. And the whole journey started around 200,000, 100,000 years ago when the first modern human, they left Africa and populated the entire world. this pretty much is the beginning of our journey. Next. And it took around back to 20,000 years ago to really occupy and populate the entire world, coming out of Africa and going every single corner in the world. Next one. But what I want you to focus is in this important map around 8,000, 9,000 years ago and 5,500 years ago. The same people who left Africa went back to Africa, and we called modern humans. The important this particular migration back into Africa is because this modern human arrived with a new technology, a new tool to develop themselves and occupy and transform in the landscape. One, they developed agriculture. Number two, terracotta and pottery work, metal work, domestication of animal, and rock painting. Without these 5 different technology, almost impossible to understand how these modern humans, modern Africans today, and the African descendant diaspora, how they managed to really reconquer back the entire continent. And pretty much it's kind of the second step in transformations and becoming humans. Next one. But this is a funny image. This is Jeremy Bentham. He was the founder of University College London. And it's at the moment, this is 1832. This is the high point of a colonial experience where the British Empire already occupied more than 3/4 of the world. Jeremy Bentham requests when he died, this is in 1832, he had to be in every single board meeting at UCL until today. This is the actual displays next to the library in London. The University of London cannot have any meeting about the future of the university and the student without having him sitting at the front table in that board meeting until today. This is pretty much a contradiction. At the same time, the British Empire created a policy of acculturation and destroying the African culture for more than 100, 200 years. Just a kind of contradiction in the what happening today. Next one. And an important thinker in Western civilizations and Western philosophy, Hegel, wrote about Africa and the importance of understanding Africa in a very peculiar way. And his way to describe and frame Africa have an incredible impact in the future of many disciplines, including the way we think about Africa in the present day. Next one. And one of his important assertions through his writing, he decided to take Africa out of the national civilization, one, because they didn't have a single God. They didn't believe in the God Western people used to believe. That pretty much then prevent them to be endorsed by this important gift of believing in God in religions that believe in Almighty God. The second one is the very bad relationship with nature. He believed the African people could not even endorse by the national civilization because they had this kind of proximity and relationship with nature. And they worship specifically the dead. And that thing is a 3 different elements kind of being used later to frame the way we think about African people. Next one. And this conceptualization of African people came in kind of 3 different terms that we use most of the time, being used over the colonial experience. African people, they are endorsed with kind of magical practice, mystical or irrational. Therefore, the idea of an inferior, dark, savage, or primitive is kind of being a default assumption we made after that. Thank you very much. Next one. And the idea of art, specific African art, is still until today, including all the effort we try to find alternative, a counter response to the way art experience is organized through the most important institution in the world. We still believe in an idea of technique. A specific go to a study in a specific school and being trained and informed by those school academy of art. We're still thinking in terms of authenticity. This art has to be authentic and somehow how to reflect the history of a place. Provenance is paramount. The social context of this work is also essential. And the idea or ideology and the theory of art is the way we think and theorize about this form of art. Next one. But African art and culture is kind of tension we're still living in the present day. We ask someone, what is art? We think is in opposition to culture, and what is culture is always in opposition to art. There is not a clear definition what that means. We're kind of confused in those two different things. And how we place our experience in this relationship with a nature African man. And we think about African art should be a synonymous of Western art. We should follow the same trajectory of Western art. This is the only way we can be respect, we can be acknowledged in that history. We have this kind of unique bond with the West. It's the only way we have a logic. It's the only way we can exist. And also we are in this idea of transiting from this idea of primitivism into a modern Africa society. The idea of modernization of Africa is critical. And how we can examine this idea of Africa from our own perspective. That is kind of what I propose from inside. Next one. But what I'm doing right now is something I call a quest for African art. There is not a single book written about African art theory until today. African art as a discipline, as a field in our history, started in 1961 in a kind of arbitrary way by accident, by two professors, one at Indiana University, the other one at Yale University. Next one. But what I try to show you here is the systematic destruction of African art over 500 years. It's just the blueprints of images produced by Europeans about African. Each of the three images show the conscious decision of burning and destruction of African art. Each of the image from early 16th century, 17th century, all the way to the 19th century, what show is burning what we call idols and fetish. And in a way, you can see there's an effort from this colonial project to decimate, erase what we know for the material culture of African people. Next one. Or you have a historical moment when Europeans decide to have an ownership over the continent. There is an interesting image that shows that splitting the whole continent apart, like the 1884, the Congress of Berlin, in which European countries decide to split the whole countries of continent of Africa for themselves. It just kind of the image show the very graphic example of what really happened in the real in the ground. Next one. But this is an image I found at Oxford University a few weeks ago, and I decided to show with you. And George Greenhill, who was the founder of a Baptist church, who went to Mbanza Congo in 1876 and created one of the epicenter of a Baptist church in the world. And this is from his photograph he took, his son took in 1935. They decided to collect objects of religious objects from around 500 miles from Mbanza Congo to Kinshasa. And it's like a massive burning and destruction of those objects. But the frustration for George Greenhill, a week after they burned 1,000 objects, he went back to the same houses and the people started producing double more objects than before. And he had a serious problem to dealing with his local mind. I take your material identity and you produce more and more powerful and more clever. Next one. But facts, I think they are important to me. An African presence in the world, we cannot deny that. African diaspora, it's happening, been happening for a long time. I'm talking about the African diaspora from 8,000, 9,000 years ago, all the way to the present, including the slave trade that kind of transport around 12 million people all the way across the Atlantic. Africans succeed to create a new life for themselves despite slavery, despite those conditions. Africa negotiates social and political and cultural spaces despite to be oppressed. And Africa learns how to coexist with other people. This is the fact. Next one. But guessing Africa is very important to me, how we understand Africa, how we come to understand Africa. Next one. I just wanted to show you one of the early images of Africa. This is 500 years ago, or 500 years ago. And I show here is an interesting image of a hybrid character. It's half human, half animal. And what you see here is the human being becoming something else. becoming an animal. That moment of becoming that is signified with the bleeding of the eland. And red is the color of time and transformation in a Khoisan culture. And this is the first time time is recorded in the history of art for everyone, for us. But in the left, you can see the idea of becoming, transformations, hybridity. And on the right, what you have is kind of mimicking, just representing a hunting scene from debris, representing Native Americans and Africans in the Caribbean, specifically what is Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Cuba. And what you can see is the human masquerading to make hunting more efficient. It's a completely different framework what you can see on the left. Next one. But the first time we see the representation of Africa came in this front upside Africa in this called TO map. You can see the way Africa being conceptualized along with Asia and Europe in those kind of three triangles or semicircle. And it's go back to the 8th century and the 14th century, 15th century variations. It's Africa being all the way from the beginning as an important concept for European and Asians. Next one. And you can see also the depiction of Africa that came out of this travel narrative from antiquity in which Africa is being presented here in a kind of partial way. It's kind of arbitrary locations of Ethiopia in what is West Africa today. Next one. But this the mark an important moment in have this kind of ownership of Africa. This is the moment before Renaissance cartography kicked in the 16th century in Venice. This is the outline of Africa in which Europeans didn't knew anything about Africa. The only thing they knew was the outlines of a continent and people along the coastline, but nothing inside the interior. And the Europeans have an interesting way to think about Africa by imagining Africa as a space. And they have a lot of detail in the outline, but nothing inside. Everything in place inside the continent is kind of arbitrary. It's more like literature. It's more like a fantasy of this place. Next one. But problem generalization is very keen in the present day. How we define Africa beyond the socioculture, Africa is poor, undeveloped. That is the kind of assumption we made about the place. How those artistic principles of Western culture can be different from the way we think about African art. If we think they are different, we need to spell it out. It's possible to be specific in relation to Africa, not the whole continent, specific culture, Yoruba, Congo, Mande, or how the African diaspora fit into this model. We think about diaspora as part of Africa. That I think is a big question right now. Next one. But this is an interesting moment in the history of African art. This is Antonio Cavazzi, the 1687, but really the printout is more like 30 years before. And Cavazzi spent 37 years, his life was a monk, a Capuchin monk in the Congo. And he was sent by the Vatican to record the life and the history of a place. But when he was writing about this image and depicting this image, he had a problem and say, I don't know how to describe in my own language, in Latin and early Italian, what is happening in this image. This is what he said. He just showing his own limitation as an observer, outsider, but at the same time still have a keen meanings of a place. And he's a prince who tried to make the rain fall. And say the only way is I had to create other meaning through the actual image. And he came to this idea of making sense out of smoke and using fire as smoke to signify the process of making rain. It was the only way because his own description from his own language didn't have a full capacity to describe what's happening here. He wasn't questioning the prince was able to make rain. He was showing his limitation to describe that event. That is a completely different thing. When we get to the 19th century, anthropology have a completely different approach of Africa. They think they understand what's happening here. This is not a position that happened at that moment of encounter. Next one. How we describe this African thing in opposition to the Caribbean, the diaspora, or integrated. How we generalize, or we go to those paradigm of race or soul, or the idea of Africa and have their own authenticity, on their own identity that is different from the rest of the world. That is a kind of challenge in the present day. And we think sometimes we use it when we talk. Next one. But this is an interesting image of Brazil showing an African descendant in Rio de Janeiro. I don't want you to focus in the garment, it's pretty cool, but that is not what is important here. It's what's happening here. Even the caption is very bad. It's the black fetish man, witchcraft. What it's showing here is someone who making a circle to protect himself in the context of the public space in Rio de Janeiro in the 19th century. Is what is important. In a way, that image has showed African people have agency, another way to endorse their own religion, even despite this social limitation under the situation of slavery. Next one. But there's another image that a French painter who traveled to Cuba, that decided to make a landscape of Cuba in which on the right you see the sugar mill that represents the epicenter of capitalism, the development of what we see today, in all the wealth start on the right. 200 sugar mills concentrate in that valley at the time that painting was made. More sugar mill in that valley than any places in the world. But on the right, the painter decided to show African people who they freed themselves. There's a very important moment in the history of Western art in which African people, they are not hunted down, they are free. They granted the free. They have the freedom. They have their own sense of agency. Next one. And you can see the contrast here in the image, the idea of a rainforest, chaos of freedoms, African agency on the left, on the right is just the valley, order, slavery, and industrialization. Next one. And here on the right, what you can see is a typical image that's being used to describe the life of African people being hunted down by animals, by dogs. And the landscape on the left shows the kind of African people in their own humanity. That is a completely different way of representing African humanity. Next one. But how we think about this concept, I call the empty-handed, empty-headed. We have this assumption that African people being transported through the slave trade, they didn't have any material culture with them when they arrived to the diaspora. That is the kind of assumptions through most of the study. They didn't have a suitcase with their own material culture because being a slave, they've been kind of deprived of everything. You only have your mind. And next one. What you have here is one of the early embodiment of this African body. In this case, the African being represented as a cyclops, like a monster, almost from Odysseus, Iliad, antiquity, the Greek and Roman literature. Next one. Or African being framed through the window of witchcraft, practicing this religion that doesn't fit into the norms, the ethic, and the moral of Western civilization. Next one. Or through what I call Hollywood fantasy, when this is a very important movie, I Walk with a Zombie in 1943 that had to do with the relationship with Hollywood with Africanness, specific voodoo coming into the state, specific in places like Miami and New York City. And you can see these large black men terrifying these two fragile white women on the left. That is the kind of way in being African people being framed through visual art, specific through Hollywood
They
fantasy.
seem
Next
pretty
one.
interested in him, actually, to my... A lot of admiration going on there from my... Anyway, sorry.
Next one. And what I call this the challenge in the present day, this idea, what I call the Picasso syndrome, the innocent gaze into Africa, and the right to appropriate African culture for the benefit of Western art. And that is fine, we don't have a problem with that. But the idea of reverse anthropology is something we maybe should think about it. The African have the right to co-opt it, the Western culture, Western tool to tell their own story. Or we can think about African continuity. Or we can now even think about being African. It's just neither African or American. It's something else. Next one, please. But this is an example of a Picasso syndrome that's using African mask to create a new kind of visual language, more at the surface, at the aesthetic of a painting. So most of this mask doesn't have to do anything with the African population that being transported to France at the time, or even in Spain. Next one. Or you have the idea of a reverse anthropology in which African art is just cannibalizing into Western art. That maybe is a possibility. Next one. But what I think is the most important contribution, or one of the most important contributions of African people in the diaspora, by called kinetic and sonic impulses. Next one. And this is just one example of, this is 1826, Lisbon, African people going to church, Catholic. But they go into church in a very different way. They go into church with music. This is African music. 35% of the population in Lisbon at the time used to be from Central Africa. But what I want you to Xerox in the two images on the right, the lady and the man. The lady is depicting a particular gesture called ajangalele, means I am in ecstasies. But translate, I agree with you. And the man on the left is making a gesture called nyenga, that translates into English, I'm melting my body into the music. That means I'm asking you for something. What you see here is a call and response through body language between two African people, one asking to go inside, the man asking to the woman to go inside the church with music. That is a very interesting way, very funky way to go into church in the 19th century. And this is an example of the same tradition of body language in Spanish Harlem. Bombom Plena, a musician teaching to the new generation how to dance the African heritage. On the right is capoeira in Brazil. Next one. Next. And this is just two examples of breakings that have an incredible impact in breakdancing, what we call breakdancing. Tansiwa is the one on the left. This is a photograph from 1961, breakdancing in the Congo. And this is Gilão Vieira, is a capoeira master from New York. This is 1995. Next one. And this is just the legacy in the Americas of African people, what they left behind. You saw Mani and Rumba in Cuba, Mambo in Cuba, Mexico, and the US, Compas in Haiti, Lija, Mento, Cumina, Cumbia, Bomba and Plena in Puerto Rico, Capoeira and Samba in Brazil, Candomblé, Uruguay, Tango. All of these terms, they are rooted in African languages, specific from Central Africa. And jazz, b-boy, dark rock, hip hop. Next one. Thank you very much.
So just before we get into questions, and I know Carlos has some questions for us that we want to answer. I know that was a bit of a deep dive, but I want everyone to understand why. I'm sure there's not a person in this room that cannot relate to their cultural history, their understanding of who they are, that hasn't been driven at some point or another by somebody else's narrative. What we are doing here as a collective of brothers and sisters is redefining that narrative on our own terms. The information is out there. So it's not as if it's a big mystery, we can't find it or whatever. It's that it's actually out there. The question is, how do we share it? How do we put one another onto it? And what the end result of that is as you continue to hear stories, whether it's from indigenous knowledge systems, from cultural traditions, once you begin to understand what's behind it, what's actually being communicated, the deeper essence of it, it doesn't take long before you find yourself in them and they find themselves in you. So with that, Brother Yasiin, should we move?
Yeah, sure.
Should we?
Sorry, I was just processing a lot of what I just heard. It was, so, yeah, that's what was happening with me.
Carlos, did you have any questions? Sorry, guys, we're really casual.
Yeah, wow, I'm glad everyone's here for this, and we're back at university, let's just say, because it's important to say, contextualize, the mission and the brands, right? Because, as you know, brands kind of co-opt images and they co-opt lifestyle from urban culture, right? And urban culture is really kind of hip hop, particularly, is derives from these roots, as you have pointed out, and it's really important for those who are b-boys, rappers, and dancers as otherwise. And what I find really compelling in what you were saying, you know, is that lineage, right? That we're all a part of, right? And that's our inheritance, right? But what this brand does, which is really great, it in terms of honoring that inheritance, you ask permission, you honor, right? And it becomes something quite personal and also educational, right? And that's what I liked about what I saw there. And I know you've had your own journey in Africa. So you're kind of reclaiming your history, your story, and now applying it to this process, right?
To a certain degree, I mean, much of what we know about who we are is false. And I'm talking about my favorite band, the Human Beings. And there are many tribes and nations and so forth. But ultimately, we all come from the one. And in the tradition of Islam, it says that we were created differently so that we would know one another. So variety is essential to creation, to the creative process, to creative living, to creative thought. So, but at the same time, we're all connected. So, I was born in Brooklyn, New York City. I'm a Native American by heritage. I'm from the Americas. I mean, my people are the original people. I think my connection with Unknown Union specifically is about the telling of the stories of the original people and how those stories are timeless, timely, and always necessary to be shared and expressed in the most beautiful way. Now, it's great to have these stories and these narratives, but if we don't communicate them in a way that's beautiful, that makes you feel beautiful when you engage them, then it's not serving the story or to the best of its capability. And for me, at this present time, throughout all times, beauty is important. Not glamour, but beauty. And what I find in all of these stories is truth and beauty. And to quote something that I heard, it said, all beautiful things are not good, but all good things are beautiful. So this is the story that I'm focused on. Some people call it swag, drip, whatever. As to quote my brother Baron Claiborne, I like to call it elan, elegance, style, beauty. And in beautiful things, as I heard it once said, beauty is the splendor of the truth. So, in summary, what I feel we are trying to express with this brand, and not just this brand, but what the way that we live, hopefully, is the splendor of the truth. And truth is freedom from illusion. And freedom is the victory of every living thing. So this is our effort to express truth and beauty. Because God is beautiful and loves beauty. So we want God to love us because we love God. It's the way you express beauty. And, bars.
Well, you know, the one thing that when we were discussing this about the fashion brand, right, and the importance of your process in one, creating the brand, but also in terms of working with your collaborators and more specifically with the people, right, and the asking of the permission, right, and this is actually one of the more beautiful stories in all this, is that you honor directly. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Whenever we can, we want to engage directly with the people that are responsible for some of the stories that we're telling. And for us, the starting point is usually with literature. So it's actually with the books, because we're limited in time and space. And I wish that would change. That would be a good superpower, actually, if I could get to other. But so the story was that you're referring to, Carlos, is when we, I don't know if anybody's seen the jackets. It's a traditional blanket called a Basutu blanket, which comes from the Mountain Kingdom, the Kingdom of Lesotho. And these blankets, the cultural tradition began with a gift from Queen Victoria to King Moshoeshoe in 1850. And it was a blanket that was manufactured in England. And King Moshoeshoe loved this blanket and adopted it. And it actually eventually replaced the traditional skin karas that he would wear and others would wear. And now when you go to Lesotho, it's more than just a cultural item. I would go so far as to say it's a national treasure. When you're born, the blanket is involved. When you go through your rites of passage, the blanket is involved. When you die, the blanket is involved. And I believe, and forgive me if anybody here is Sotho and I mispronounce this, like slap me afterward. But in Sotho they say, kobo kebo pelo, which means the blanket is life. So when we wanted to work with this blanket, a beautiful item, and repurpose it into traditional form, we did 2 runway shows for King Letsi and his wife in Maseru. And it was through that process that they had granted us the permission. They were like, okay, you understand the meanings behind the blankets. You understand the symbols. You understand that when you're taking it apart and reconstructing it, you just don't do it haphazardly. That the lines must meet together, because even when we wear the blanket and we wrap it around, we make the lines meet. And so that was one example where we were given the honor to be able to work directly with the people who I think, at least in my mind, are responsible for the protection of that cultural tradition. And when that's possible and when we're invited into those rooms, we're there. We're there.
One of the things that, as I'm looking at Yasiin's pants, you know, and this is quite interesting because I'm seeing this around here, where how people are dressed and the signifiers, right? And we see these cultural signifiers throughout history, which you've pointed out beautifully. And one of the things that, in terms of, and I'm glad you brought up this idea of Picasso kind of like so-called reinventing, you know, modern art and contemporary art, when in fact he stole so much from Africa in terms of visual identity and the signifiers and stuff like that. So when we think about this, right, these modern signifiers and how they're being remixed now, and I'm sure you're going to see it around here. Do you feel that, you know, does that feel honest to you, or does it feel exploitive?
I think there are two ways to think about. I think it could be honest for Western art, in the case of Picasso, to make us kind of look into and into this kind of tradition for the sake of modern art, more dynamic, more diverse in a way. It's a modern art, 1907, kind of with a moment of crisis in Western aesthetic, specifically in avant-garde aesthetic. And Picasso is the one that provides kind of a way to solve this crisis. In that sense, it's honest for Western art, but he didn't thought about African people. That kind of exercise didn't have any counterpart, any kind of interlocutor in the African side, so the African diaspora. And that, I think, is that there is a problem. I think to question honesty is a kind of harsh term, because it's somehow our behaviors as human is defined by interacting with other culture one way or another. I think it's I think for me it's more about the process in which that relationship, that kind of gaze into Africa take place, and how does new meaning are created? What is the platform? What is the tool that can be presented? Not just for one particular size, it's for everyone.
Right, but is that acceptable when Victoria's Secret's co-ops?
Yeah. But I think it's the way anthropology, they think about someone, you go to the African and do research, you say, oh, my informant. So for me, it's a very negative term, because you're telling that someone is betraying their own culture for the sake of providing deep content to their own culture to be presented or reviewed in a different context back through the lenses of academia. I think that is what I think is more about, in the way that in thinking about UU, is about knowledge production. How we create meaning, how we create content. So what kind of tool we put there in place that allow us to make those kind of observations in a more informed way, in a more honest way. And I think that is, fashion is one interface possible, but could be music, could be body language, could be literature. And all of this, there are multiple possibilities. You can exercise each of them individually, or you can combine all of them all together. It's up to us to understand how we can give attraction to those process of translation. I think is a very harsh term. I like to think shifting. When I speak in English, I don't need to translate from other language I know. I just endorse English for what it is. And I shift into Spanish, Kikongo, Dutch, or whatever, Russian, because I can command myself in all these other possibilities. And I think translation, I think, is the problem. We are defined by this idea. We're thinking we are always translating something from something else. I don't think we are translating if you are capable to speak in multiple language. I prefer to think we are shifting into this new reality. And we endorse ourselves to understand that reality, we can free ourselves from those limitations, from the kind of superficial approach.
And I appreciate that which brings me up to the concept of inheritance, right? Young culture is very quick to cut and paste what they see currently. And that there's, in the long view of things, where we think about culture that, going as far back as you presented, right? That's our inherent, our collective inheritance lies in that. And we've translated that over time for our time. And particularly with hip hop, and you and I are New Yorkers, and we come from a place that invented this concept, this idea of the will to kind of self-manage and create a culture, right? And part of that was it's quite interesting because it is borrowing from the African diaspora, the Afro-Caribbean diaspora specifically with rap and dance, and that when we think about New York and hip hop, right, especially when we had that era of the Black Conscious era with P.E., Rakim, and you and Talib and everybody, that this kind of empowerment of identity through the act of your creativity, right? That's what we know and love you for, because you were consciously and awoke and also pointing back to Africa. And then all of a sudden you literally committed yourself to Africa and publicly?
I didn't. Again, I'm from Earth, like everyone else. You know, when people ask me, they say the most honest thing to say when anybody asks you where you're from is to say mom and dad. Right? So Africa is a place like any other place on the earth with its unique characteristics, positive characteristics, challenging negative characteristics, much like human beings. At a time, when I was a younger man, there was very much a back to Africa ethos or mentality, looking back to try to connect to some ancestral connection, and so on. And the reality is as time goes on and I'm able to be exposed to more and experience more, what I'm coming to realize is that we were everywhere. We weren't just confined to one corner of the earth. Oh, you know, you're African, so you're only in Africa. Native people, original people, indigenous people, aboriginal people were present throughout the entire globe. So I didn't commit myself to Africa per se, as some sort of, oh, I'm going back home sort of thing. In the beginning, yeah, there was that feeling. But again, it's a country called Earth, so the earth and the fullness thereof. As much as Africa is one of my favorite places on this spaceship called Earth, I'm grateful for the gift of being able to move throughout this creation physically and spiritually, with a sense of freedom. The interlopers, the robber barons, they don't respect borders. Nations, or tribes, customs, traditions are not things that they respect. And that's it's in a negative sense. In a positive sense, I view it as, being not limitless, because boundaries are good to have when they're positive. There is order in the universe, I believe. Even in chaos, there's a certain biorhythm, there's a certain pattern even to wildness. But I came to Cape Town because that's where I was feeling good. And I was coming from a place that wasn't making me feel very good, And then I came to Cape Town and I felt good, and then some things happened that didn't make me feel very good. And life goes on. For me, it's a cosmic endeavor that's kind of beyond the Americas, Africa, this, that. Yeah, all of that is real, it's valid. But it's beyond that. For me, personally, I don't know what it is for anybody. I can't even speak for Jason or Barbara or anybody. But for me, it's a cosmic conversation. And ultimately, what we're referencing is the diameter of not even beyond the universe, but the cosmic experience of being alive, right? This is the reference point. And there's certain cultures and peoples on this spaceship Earth that are referencing that and their creativity and sharing their perspective on that with the world. That's what's interesting to me. I like to steer away from like the kind of gang rhetoric of, oh, this is my nation, this is my tribe, and that's great. But yeah, that's a king, but what's the crown to the clouds? You know? So I'm referencing that for me on a creative level, on a human level, on how I'm striving to live my life. Because no matter where you go, there you are. You know, I could come from America and go to wherever, but if my relationship with me in here is not right, it don't make a difference where I'm at. I'm just carrying the same dysfunction from one place to another. Just, you know, a new address don't erase the anguish if you didn't negotiate the anguish. With that being said, there's certain zones that facilitate an awareness of self and the cosmic situation, and in certain zones that don't facilitate that.
Do you feel this project can be a vehicle for that? Does the project feel like a vehicle for that?
For those who are seeking who are on that journey or on that path, some people may not even be on that journey. Be like, oh, that's swag. I like that. I like how that feel. Some people may see the symbols or the composition and be like, that's not for me. And you know what? For me personally, as a creative person, just as a human being, I'm not against nobody, but I'm not for everybody. You know what I'm saying? I'm here to live my truth because that's what I was put here to do, like everybody else. Some people connect with that. Some people are indifferent to it. Some people flat out reject it. I'm not gonna argue with any of them because there's nothing really to be gained there. I'm on a journey. I'm on a path. You know, if you can't help me, fine. But you're not gonna get in my way, and I'm not gonna allow you to hurt me either. And to quote one of the ayahs in the Quran, wa alaykum dinukum waliya din. To you be your way, to me be mine. We can agree to disagree about a lot of different things. I don't have to harm the other, and I'm not gonna let the other harm me just because we don't see eye to eye on something. And I've said this before: the measure of a civilization is not about how well people or cultures agree. It's about how well you disagree with someone or a group, and to the degree that you respect each other's life, liberty, and safety, right? That's civilized people. If you see a group of people that have a way different than you don't go destroy this is nonsense. This is savagery. This is not the way of noble souls. So many indigenous people across this spaceship have been subject to that type of aggressive attention simply because someone from the outside did not understand their way of living or their way of expression. So rather than just be like, oh, that's your thing, this is our thing, they seek to destroy that thing and impose their way. And this is not the way of noble people. So I guess in summary, the real aim is just to be like, this is who we are. This is what we find beautiful, and we express that. If you're with it, fine. If not, whatever your frequency is out there for you, and you'll find it. And if it's not here, then be on your journey. And if you find something that corresponds with that frequency here, then welcome. But, I mean, I'm not here to explain this, I went to public school in New York City. I'm a smart guy, but I'm only here but for so much talking, you know what I'm saying? I already rap. I think I kind of said too much in certain instances, to be honest. I'm just here to activate at this point. It's like, like Muhammad Ali said, I'll let y'all deal with the results. What it mean to me and what it mean to you is I don't have really no expectation of it. I'm here doing it because it helps me feel joy. And I know that God is not interested in my misery. So I'm here to express the joy. If you're with that, then cool. If you're not, okay, there's something else for you to do. But I'm not going to get into like some sort of like explanation for why I'm living on my instinct and I'm looking for the joy.
And what's interesting, you're looking for, there's the dichotomy here is quite interesting, you know, scholarship, design ethos, mission, purpose, right? And that, you know, this is a very interesting mix to try to blend into something of a consumer brand, right?
It's true.
What makes it all the more interesting is that you're from America.
Yes.
And you know, and the concept of returning home, let's say, and to take this on.
The earth is home for Aboriginal people, for all people. I understand that it's a very, I don't mean to interrupt, that's a very popular narrative. We're going home, we weren't home, we got displaced. No.
Well, let me give one example, because I think it's like the new collection that we have coming out of the Olmec is a really good example. I want to clarify, because what Yasiin is trying to get at is that the story that we've been told isn't the whole story. And that's why he keeps coming back to this issue of what's home and what's not home. So one of the new, like if you cut, there's a shirt we have that says, "We came before Columbus." And there's another one that says 1492 and it's shattered. Now, a lot of people don't know, well, why? Well, 1492 is 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That's the common narrative. Europeans came over and discovered, right, America. Like, oh, this is here. The reality is, however, there's a book that we're referencing, which is written, it was called They Came Before Columbus. And it's a story, actually, of the Olmec people. So these are an African people that were in the Americas long before. They predated the Mayans. They predated the Aztecs. Oh, you said they're not Africans. Okay, so interesting enough, the debate is still out there. So to your point, so what they did in the book, at least, right? They referenced, right, stone cutting. They referenced plants. They referenced certain animals that were domesticated, and there was a link between West Africa and the Americas. The suggestion is, yes, brother.
Doesn't the ocean go in two directions?
It does.
Why do you assume Americans didn't go to Africa?
No, okay, fair enough, but I'm using the term African though, and you're making a good point.
Why are no Olmec heads found in Africa? They're only found in the Yucatan in Central America.
In Mexico, you're absolutely right. So the reason I'm using the term African to answer your question, brother, is because most people are dealing with very complicated subjects. And usually when you say African, then in the mind, you see a vision of black people. So, right. I'm not telling you, yeah.
I'm saying you guys are talking about people co-opting things. Now, in my family, we're not Africans. We were always in America. The definition of the original American is the copper-colored people.
Hold on. Let people hear. It's important.
The original definition of American is the copper-colored people found in the Americas by Europeans. I'm copper-colored. We are some of the oldest people on Earth. There are more pyramids in Mexico than there are in the rest of the world. There are 640 edible crops on the African continent. 600 of them are indigenous to the Americas. So who cultivated them? Who built all the pyramids in the Americas? Aliens? Who? I feel like the same. So people are saying jazz is African. How is jazz African? It's from New Orleans. How is blues or hip hop African? It's American. I'm just offended by people saying that I'm an African. Is somebody telling me some other thing?
And you know what? And first of all, I want to say that this is my dear friend and brother Barry Claiborne, a fantastic artist and photographer. all of you know one of the most iconic images in all of music culture today. The picture of Biggie with the crown is his image. Among many others, but I'm very grateful for him being here and bringing up this point, because for me, I don't speak for Jason, I'm not speaking for Barbaro, and what I appreciate is that we do have a dynamic point of view on the same subject. For me, when you talk specifically about you, right, and what we're doing with this project, it is about the representation of original culture and truth, right? Everywhere, not just confined to Africa, right? Because people of native origin were present throughout this planet for all time, and interacting and creating. So this narrative that the Americas only got populated with native indigenous people via the slave trade is inaccurate. Right?
It's not just inaccurate, it's harmful. It's disrespectful to in my opinion, it's disrespectful to everybody in this room. Because what it's trying to do is it's trying to confine all of us to a particular narrative, which has a psychological effect on us. You see what I'm saying? We're coming to a stage, in my opinion, we're coming to a stage where we have the ability to learn, right? Let's just keep it simple, to learn from one another, to define who we are. To do it based on the ideologies that exist or are prevalent today is a huge mistake. Why would we rely only on the wisdom of this generation when we have access to the wisdom of generations and generations from long before? What I think we're really trying to, what we're really trying to do, and this is true for the mission, what we're really trying to do is enter into the marketplace of ideas. All of this information that is out there for us, there's so much to be learned. It just requires a deeper dive, a slightly deeper look. Yes, brother?
Jason, what's you?
Didn't I start off? You is us. It is our collective human story. We started... people may ask, and I want to get off the African subject though, because that's where we started, but we started in Africa. Why? Out of respect to the place where we started the project. How can we start a project about the beauty of human history and culture, but then we don't look under our feet in our own backyard, right? But you is, for us, it's a journey, it's an exploration. None of us have the answers. Our brother right now just pointed out some stuff to all of us in the room that when we leave here, I'm gonna pick up a conversation with and be like, let's talk more about it. These stories and these narratives are important.
But
yes, sir.
The reason I ask you again, and to clarify, was not just for you, it was for us.
No, but see, I can't define it for you. You asked the question, you asked Jason, what is you? What is it to you?
Well,
that's what it is, right? I can't, right, what is you?
What you to me is what I'm learning from you right now.
Then that's what it is. But it's something different for the person sitting to your right and the person sitting to your left, right? And I'm not trying to drive what that narrative is, because I don't have your perspective or her perspective or his perspective. It is whatever that experience is that you're having with it. And that's what it is to me is different because I'm in it in another way. But when it comes out to you, it transforms and becomes something, and it's dynamic in that way, without losing its identity. So I don't like to confine it or narrow that. And I guess I'm not trying to seem ornery or like prickly or anything, but you gotta understand, I come from a part of the world where the identity of people like me is always subject to some constriction or conscription, and you gotta explain yourself or lay out all of these goofy ass details of where you going and passcode nonsense. So like, no, who are you? What you going? Why you did that? Cause I'm grown, first of all, and that's what I felt like doing. Nobody asked the Dutch East India Company why you doing that or why you wilding, right? When I was in Cape Town, the first question that people ask me is, "What are you doing in Cape Town?" Minding my business. I'm minding my business. You don't ask no, but they don't ask the German boys. They don't ask nobody from Holland what they doing, and they probably be better suited to ask them, "What you doing here?" Right? Because a lot of times what they doing there ain't really that decent, right? I'm just, okay? But I don't want to get into all of that because I'm not trying to burn myself up being angry at them for being, that's between them and God, right? And I'm not going to argue with nobody about there is a God, whatever. Some things could be true without you believing in them. Okay, the truth don't need you to believe in it to be real. Okay? So, and I'm busy, right? I'm busy. I'm not here to get into the back and forth. I don't need to congratulate myself for being, intellectual or whatever. This is what I'm doing because this is what I love. Go find what you love and do that.
Right.
Right? That's my message to the world because all of this, they always want to know what's on our mind. What do you think? Well, I be minding my business. That's what I be thinking about. I be thinking about things that I ain't got to explain to you. Feel this or not, right? At the end of the day, all of these narratives and stories, nobody here care about it if it ain't swinging, if it ain't dripping, swagging, all that. You want to feel that magic. You want to feel that flow, right? You don't care about none of this big-headed, egghead, great Dr. Big-Head shit that I'm talking about. Nobody cares if it ain't swinging. If it ain't swinging, we not even serving the story. So what I'm here to do is to be like, that's great. I respect all of that. I get it. I feel it. But we got to make it swinging, right? Because somebody need to put it on their back and be like, feel this. I need to put it on and be like, feel this. When I put on these pants, it's like, yeah, you look great. Yeah, of course I do, right? That's the aim. I'm not out here to, I'm here to be as elegant and as beautiful and exuberant as possible. It's possible before I get out of this human uniform and go back to the one who created me. Furthermore, all of these source materials that we make this stuff out of, where do it come from? The earth that the Creator created for us to be able to derive these materials and fashion them in a way. None comes to knowledge except as the one permits. Not only what do you know, how do I know what I know? How do I have the means of cognition to be able to even process the world around me, right? Do you feel it? It's not about the action of the mind for me. It's about the action of his. So you either connect what we doing on a heart level, or it's just not for you. The whole other background about all of the historical context is no disrespect. This man has dedicated so much of his life to the research and study of these very important subjects. And I have super respect for that, right? Scholarship is important. We need that context. We need to be challenged and to think about ourselves and the world we live in a completely, in a new and more enlightened and real way. Nonetheless, with all of that being said, if the pants don't fit right, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got the swing. And I'm here more than anything, not more than anything, but primarily to make sure that the swing is swinging, right?
Right, but that swing, here's the thing.
But hold on, I just want to say one thing, because while that's true, while that's true, brother, I'm gonna tell you, this is what's so amazing about working with these cats.
Bring it.
Because for real, everything he said is right, and he makes sure the swag that you're seeing, that's where you come in. But when it comes to which ones you put on, like I know you picked. See, this is, I'm going to call you out, brother. I know you picked. He's got this symbol. You know, I was talking about this as a cosmic adventure. Remember, you brought that up earlier. He's wearing the symbol for the Shokwe right now where God, this is their symbol for the universe as God spoke it into existence. On his pants, right, reads, Siat Magushi. Sorry, brother. I'm talking too fast and my mouth is dry. It translates roughly to call back to our ancestors. We go back to our ancestors to bring their knowledge forth. So even though Yasiin is there to make sure that everything feels good and looks good and is right, at the same time, brother, and tell me if I'm lying, at the same time, it's the meanings behind it, though, that
to serve the story. It's to serve the story. The beauty has to serve the story, and the narrative is not empty. So, but what I'm saying is that they're equally important. I don't want to just engage because it's a great story and all. You know, I'm not here. We're not here so that people take pity or sympathy on us and be like, I got to support this because it's ethically produced and it's produced in Africa and these great native people made it. No, if it don't fit right, if it don't make you feel good, it's not serving that narrative. And ultimately, people won't connect with it, with those stories and those narratives, if it's not beautiful and elegant and all of those things.
So I have a question to build on top of that, because there is beauty and there is all that. And, you know, you guys are very contemporary. And so in terms of what you're because you're really getting a lot of insight, you know, personal insight from each of these gentlemen. And when you think of brands, all these brands that are outside that may be just about design, and yes, of course, the swag and the style and all of that, that how much, just by show of hands, how much does a story matter to you? This is your audience, right?
I just wanted to add something. Something that matters a lot to you is the power of choice and how we can imagine things and the power of imaginations. That I think is the two key important philosophies and we follow in the creative process. But I still, it's important to be specific. You need to have a centrality to imagine your connection back to Africa, so a connection to your heritage, if you wanted to claim that. And I am from Cuba, so I have multiple identities, been in many different places, speak multiple languages. But I grew up, my family came from Central Africa, so self-liberated and fight for the freedoms. And I grew up in the Congo religion in Cuba that have a language. It's not Spanish, not French, it's an African language. Africa produced more graphic writing system than any places in the world in the last 200 years. And I learned this language, this graphic writing system all my life in a kind of automatic way. I went to school, I studied, but I never questioned to the people who trained me the meanings of those symbols. I memorized 50,000 symbols all my life. But no one explained me the mechanic of creating meaning. How you create meaning through symbols, I memorized throughout my life. Until I decide to claim that history, to be specific. You know, we talk about Africa, of course, but I don't believe in this general sense of Africa. It's impossible. It's so diverse, so big. I understand in a centrality, in a specific traction you give to yourself, and how you can share that beauty with other people. And that is what we try to do, to find those centers and how we can amplify you is an amplifier, is an interface that allows us to connect with other people, to want to have the same kind of process to themselves.
And in terms, of course, let's keep it real. You're creating product for a market, for a very brutal market, a very self-conscious, very consumption-oriented market. right? And you want to amplify this. How big do you want this to go? And not just how big, what's the reach for you in terms of where you want to be with you and us?
I think I want to touch on two things. One is how Yasiin talked about, the earth is our home. I think that's really important to the ethos of Unknown Union. So we want to continue this journey. That's number one. And for those of you who are on a similar journey or wish to journey with us or alongside or separate or wherever, you're our people if you're a journeyman, journeywoman. That's part one. Part two, I would like to share some advice that my brother Yasiin gave me when we first met in Salt River in Woodstock. Just outside of Woodstock is the neighborhood Salt River. My brother knows exactly what I'm talking about. And we were there, and we had it was a little studio, and this stage is bigger. And we were working, and we were talking about ideas and sharing ideas and working, and Yasiin stopped me at one point, and he was like, Jay, he's like, look around you. And I was like, okay. It didn't take long. And he was like, no matter how big this gets, no matter how far this goes, because he was like, this is fire. He goes, don't you ever leave this little room. And I would like to share that because that's really, I would say, very much comes down to who we are as individuals. We're opening up to you, and you're right, this is personal. We're opening up because for us, this journey is personal. So we're just like, look inside. And where we want to be is in that room, where we're sharing with one another, building with one another, creating stories. If Flash comes, if Grandeur comes, if people are like, yo, this is the flyest brand on earth, okay. But we're going to hear it from that little room in Salt River.
Yes.
1 second.
And I'll tell you where I took that from. There's a White Stripes song. It goes, I'm not going to sing it. So when you're in a little room and you're working on something good, but then if it's really good, you're going to need a bigger room. When you're in a bigger room, you might not know what to do. You might have to think of how you got started sitting in your little room. Right? Roosevelt Projects, apartment 9F is my little room.
Boom.
Right? My aim is never to get out of that little room, but to open up that little room to as many people who care to look inside. Right? So that's the aim. And to build on what my brother said here, when you said, what's the aim for you? Well, first of all, we're just going to negotiate today. Right? And if we get tomorrow, then we negotiate tomorrow. The aim is to go on for as long as we can go on. As far as benchmarks and all of that thing, yeah, we got desires, ambitions. Do we think we could kill it? We feel like we're already killing the game, right? We feel like we one of the best to do it. Y'all just got to catch up to it, right? I already know it. Now it's on other people to find out, and we want to spread that knowledge as best we can, but not in the seek of prestige or attention or anything like this. Just out of enthusiasm and joy. So that's the real thing. I just gotta say, man, I'm very happy and grateful to be here. I'm not no expert on anything. To quote Malcolm X, he said, "I'm not a prophet." I'm paraphrasing. I'm not a prophet. I'm not a scholar, but I am sincere. My sincerity is my credential. So that's what we try to live by: is to be sincere and to be useful and be helpful and
Thank you, brothers. And I just want to say, before 1 second. You know, I kept asking you and asking you and asking you for a reason, because we needed to hear this from all of you, because it's not just one answer, right? And the answer, like you said, it's not just, I have my own answer. All of us have our own answer on this, okay? And this was the blessing of today, right? That we have been kind of experiencing this burgeoning brand that is so thoughtful and considerate of you and you and you and you and you. Universally, you know? And so I just want to say props to you guys and all the best.
Thank you all for coming. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you.